The killer phrase was at the end when Kimmel said, "You just don't realize it." Because you see, he's smarter than you, and he needs you to know that. And his ego can't bear that there's someone out there more famous and more influential than him. I got news for you, Kimmel. The last time you mattered, Bruce Jenner still had a penis.
Why didn't Jimmy Kimmel live with him? Like, Jimmy Kimmel is a talented guy, and I don't think he's like an evil person or something, but he's made this deal where he just serves power and attacks anybody who challenges power. Like, how can, honestly, how can he look in the mirror and say, I'm doing something honorable? Like, how can he live with himself? How can his wife sleep with him?
Well, it'd be...
I mean that.
It'd be one thing.
Before Greg, Jimmy Kimmel believed he was making jokes. Kimmel questioned whether witness protection was still a possibility after Gutfeld and Carlson transformed his punchlines into a public therapy session. One provided the sass, the other the intellectual body slams. And Jimmy, well, he brought sorrow. This wasn't merely a retort. Rather, it was a full-fledged comedy breakdown. It's amazing how devastated he was. Let's just say that even his laugh track stopped laughing.
Late night host Jimmy Kimmel is back on the air after taking the summer off. He's missed a lot. Kimmel says if you're not vaccinated, you shouldn't get a hospital ICU bed. But I'm not sure if Jimmy was being sincere because he wasn't crying. Anyway, it's just funny hearing someone say, "I see you," who nobody actually sees. Oh, look, I don't want to suggest that Kimmel's show has become boring and predictable, but last night during the taping, people in the studio audience were changing the channel.
Unaware that two very different beasts, Tucker Carlson and Greg Gutfeld, were honing their claws with the dexterity of seasoned sadists, Jimmy Kimmel strode into another monologue as though he were the undisputed heavyweight champion of late-night comedy. It wasn't a roast or even a skirmish. Rather, it was more like watching a houseplant get thrown into a wood chipper slowly, oddly satisfyingly, and completely one-sidedly.
Comedians are supposed to hold people in positions of power accountable.
Suck up
Yeah.
to the people in charge.
Exactly.
He's their Praetorian guard.
Yeah.
And it's like the self-hatred he must feel, because he wasn't always, that's my point. Yeah. I mean, Colbert has always been a hard partisan, talented guy, but obviously he's not a comedian. But Kimmel was a comedian. Like, how does he, I don't understand.
I don't know
how he can sleep.
He might buy into the narrative to the extent that he thinks it's morally wrong to joke about these certain topics.
But it's not just that. He's like pouring hot oil on the peasants from the parapet. Right. Like, he's hurting anyone who challenges the king. Right. It's crazy.
During finals week, Jimmy, the Hollywood moral hall monitor, once again attacked Fox News, using his trademark smug backhanders, such as a man who still believes that sarcasm is an Olympic sport, to explain politics to the kids with a raised eyebrow and all the fun of a substitute teacher. Unfortunately for Jimmy, this time, the class included Gutfeld, a man who eats smugness for breakfast and roasts egos like marshmallows.
If you are open up to being wrong, you're more than likely going to end up right once in a while. But these guys have been wrong for 8 years. They've been wrong for 8 years because they can't let go of their egos. It's true in the media. It's actually, it's true among the never Trumper Republicans. If you look at the sourpusses, it's an internal emotional feeling that why him, Trump, and not me? Whether it's like, I don't know, Bill Kristol or Jonah Goldberg. It's like, these are guys that were generally normal. And then their egos just kind of like, they just took it hard. And you got to let go, guys.
Gutfeld didn't merely reply. He lit a cigarette after the burn he gave, not because he needed one, but rather because the metaphor called for it. He only needed Kimmel's swollen self-importance presented on a silver platter, not props, applause signs, or a Harvard writing room. Gutfeld delivered a 5-course dinner of mockery after taking one glance at Jimmy's comedy by committee routine, which was more painful than realizing that people really watched the man's performance.
My belief that humor, these were humorless scolds who just didn't think our jokes were funny, and they thought they were offensive, and they were being hypersensitive, and that's not the case.
No, it's not. You're going through the stages of realization.
The stages of realization. I eventually learned and came to realize that it's not humor. Humor is a vehicle for truth delivery. They don't like the fact that the narrative is being challenged in a way that's effective, and so they have to shut you up. And so that's what it's about. It has nothing to do with them being
Wait, they don't
humorless
have
schools
limits.
or
They don't have.
and
Greg was in a different league than Kimmel, who was still clapping at his own jokes. Greg pulled up data and a few scalpel-sharp jabs at how Kimmel's show now survives solely on virtue signaling and YouTube clips with titles like, "Kimmel Destroys Democracy Deniers Again." Gutfeld, who somehow managed to turn a budget set and one-liners into the highest-rated late-night program, dropped a performance so aggressive that it should have come with a Surgeon General's warning. And the best part was that he didn't even yelling. Gutfeld's takedown wasn't mean or loud. Rather, it was clinically precise, like watching a cat casually knock a wine glass off a table only to watch it shatter. Jimmy was the glass. When it appeared that Kimmel might limp away with what was remained of his ego and glide away, Greg was the cat, and the internet sucked it up like Chardonnay had spilled. Unlike Gutfeld, Tucker Carlson seems calm, collected, and unconcerned, like a Bond villain who has just discovered that the world is running out of martinis. Tucker doesn't cause havoc. Instead, he dismantles people with a smug head tilt that shouts, "I've read 5 more books than you, and I'm about to make you feel it." He does this without making jokes. In his approach to the Kimmel case, Tucker used the term, "the tragedy of the once funny comedian," a case study in relevance lost, as an academic thesis. Greg Gutfeld fueled the fire in pages of sarcasm masquerading as insight. There were no jokes. After installing the gas pipe, Tucker Carlson left and observed the entire explosion from a glass tower.
I have a few names to add. CNN, MSNBC, CBS, the town crier. All outlets ignoring Biden's revolving door of gas. His constant forgetfulness, weird rambling speeches being let off stage. All the while you told us there's nothing to see here. Meanwhile, any parent can see this face means you got to change a diaper.
With the accuracy of a forensic accountant, he dissected Jimmy's development or regression based on your tolerance for hypocrisy. Kimmel had previously been a clown for all seasons, unafraid to offend everyone equally, but now Tucker portrayed him as the hollow shell of his former self, wrapped in self-righteousness and walking through applause lines like a comedian cosplaying as a senator. There was something particularly cruel about Tucker's perspective. Rather than making fun of the jokes, he made fun of their necessity. Kimmel's comedy has evolved into a safe haven for those who wish to laugh at others, but only those they already detest, and not in a way that makes you roll your eyes. Liberal approach Tucker raised a mirror, and Kimmel's image abruptly changed from Jon Stewart to an off-brand morality expert from a Whole Foods parking lot. Meanwhile, Greg Gutfeld was busy giving the camera high fives and making jokes that were so scathing that they could cut marble surfaces. Tucker was creating a subdued symphony of contempt by framing Kimmel as a dramatic metamorphosis from rebel to sermonizer, from edgy to echo chamber, the kind of fall from grace that doesn't end with a boom but rather with a protracted, agonizing whimper into irrelevance.
Even the quote comedians, they were on propaganda duty too. Watch this.
He's also pushing U.S. intelligence to find evidence for this theory that the virus was accidentally released from a lab in Wuhan. That's his new angle to feed the wingnuts, to treat this virus like it was a conspiracy of some kind.
It should have never happened. This plague should never have happened. It could have been stopped. But people chose not to stop it.
What people? Tomorrow he'll blame the Spanish flu on Antonio Banderas.
Yeah. Imagine if you're a comedian and all of a sudden your cue card has all kinds of talking points from politicians and foreign governments on it. Don't read it. You degrade yourself and you become complicit in the greatest crime in history.
And the stats that made it all hurt more actual ones. In addition to outperforming Kimmel, Gutfeld's show was crushing him in the ratings like a semi-truck passing a gluten-free bakery for a man who was once the top dog in a legendary era. With only canned laughter and moralistic monologues to keep him afloat, Jimmy now found himself flailing in Gutfeld's rearview mirror and waving frantically. Social media, as was to be expected, had a field day as the memes came in faster than Jimmy's Nelson numbers could drop side-by-side comparisons. Tucker played a solemn, disdainful librarian, while Gutfeld dressed as a late-night barbarian with a flaming microphone, concluding Jimmy's relevance. They were crowned the most unlikely tag team champions in the cultural humiliation arena by the internet. Despite being chosen as Fox News' court gesture, Gutfeld understood that comedy should be uncomfortable, sting a little, and not feel like a TED Talk that forgot to be interesting. It wasn't just about who was funnier, it was also about who had changed and who hadn't. Tucker, who never tried to make people laugh, realized that a smile conveyed by intelligence hurts more than a punchline. Jimmy, in the meantime, was continued reciting jokes as if they were holy texts, his eyes wide with a look that said, "Please clap." He was unaware that he was playing a new game, one in which his opponents were not just meaner or louder, but also quicker, sharper, and more devastatingly self-aware.
So these fellas are experiencing deep mental pain. And it's not just them. Journalists are now offering tips to deal with their disappointment, frustration, even fear. And I get it. That's normal after any loss. I'm still mad about losing World's Sexiest Man to Johnny Depp. But why would people feel fear? Maybe because their only news sources are constantly telling them Trump's going to turn America into Nazi Germany. But you know who felt actual fear during the Biden administration? People who had to ride the subway or have to buy groceries.
And possibly the most delectable irony of all the individuals as the dust settled, it became painfully evident that Jimmy Kimmel had not been degraded by louder voices, but rather had been undone by better writing, clearer thinking, and the kind of charisma that doesn't beg for applause but commands attention. Still, there was no debate, no face-to-face confrontation, no dramatic showdown, just two well-aimed salvos from opposite towers, reducing Jimmy's pedestal to a pile of laugh track ashes. Jimmy had spent years mocking the people who supposedly don't get comedy were the ones now producing it. Kimmel, on the other hand, stayed motionless, explaining jokes, preaching to the converted, and clapping at his own punchlines like the guy at a karaoke bar who honestly thinks he nailed Queen. However, the crowd had thinned out, the microphone had been unplugged, and all that was left was the echo of a career that once meant something. There's something particularly painful about being humiliated by two people who don't even acknowledge your existence as an equal. Gutfeld and Carlson didn't argue with him. They just pointed, laughed, and moved on.
Dana, I'll start with you. It was a terrible night for women. Trump won more women. He won the popular vote. What are these people moaning about?
I don't know. I mean, today Brian Stelter tweeted that there was a talent agent who told him that a lot of members of the media are questioning whether they have it in them to cover another Trump cycle. And then they wonder why the working class is like, guys, you are so out of touch with what real work is. And also, they didn't really cover the Biden administration. They didn't cover the border. They didn't cover inflation.
Kimmel was viewed by Gutfeld as a target-rich situation. He was treated like an old coupon by Tucker. Together, they reinvented him as a warning story rather than merely roasting him. Late-night television used to be about silly skits, belly laughs, and the odd musical guest who didn't look like they walked out of a Whole Foods yoga aisle. But nowadays it's like watching C-SPAN with a laugh track recorded during the shift. No one is more embracing comedy's new uniform, a suit of political armor, than Jimmy Kimmel, TV's most ardent liberal arts professor with a comedy degree who previously appeared on The Man Show as the guy who threw beer bongs. Kimmel burned someplace during the Trump administration. Kimmel now begins his monologues as though he were testifying before Congress, and his punchlines are more like political theses, complete with dramatic pauses, a solemn tone, and enough smugness to power a Prius. He isn't making jokes. Instead, he is staging interventions for people who didn't ask for one, and Greg Gutfeld is somewhere on Fox throwing word grenades and dancing on what's left of the traditional late-night format as if it owes him money. The individual who kicked down the late-night club door, walked past the velvet rope, and said, "You call this edgy?" is Gutfeld, the epitome of defiance. I have dad jokes that hurt more.
There are a lot of people who are like on your side because they're for free speech, who are not actually for free speech at all, who are pushing a very specific foreign policy agenda, for example, and using another issue to lower your defenses and let themselves into your brain. And I think that's really sinister, really, really, really sinister. And it's becoming more obvious now. Like, if you're for free speech, then you're just for free speech because you support the principle.
While other hosts continue to question, what does this mean for our democracy? Gutfeld zips through parts with the subtlety of a marching band in a library, and America is paying attention to him while Kimmel speaks as if he's running for a Senate seat. Enjoy this fart joke and jab at AOC, said Gutfeld. Then there is Tucker Carlson, the sardonic scholar with a sneer so patronizing it might make your stomach turn. He isn't a member of the late-night team, but he might as well be their last boss. Tucker's strength isn't stand-up. Rather, it's stand-own. He doesn't discuss or criticize. Instead, he looks at Kimmel and Gutfeld as if he were a disgruntled headmaster, wondering how these two clowns got into his esteemed boarding school. And just when you think he's above the fray, he says something like, "Kimmel's a cautionary tale about letting your writers do all your thinking." And then, without warning, he threw a grenade with a monocle on it. This entire situation is a full-fledged cultural clash rather than merely a dispute. Late at night, the battlefield isn't humor, and TV is falling apart. Its identity. Tucker is the guy in the corner drinking brandy while watching everything burn and recounting the fallout like it's a Ken Burns documentary, while Kimmel is the sanctified woke comedian who seeks to save the world one eye roll at a time. Gutfeld is the jester flipping double birds at the establishment with a sharp tongue and Nelson data.
The job description of a comedian is not so different from the job description of a journalist, as traditionally constituted. Tell the truth about the powerful. Comedians are usually alive.
The killer phrase was at the end when Kimmel said, "You just don't realize it." Because you see, he's smarter than you, and he needs you to know that. And his ego can't bear that there's someone out there more famous and more influential than him. I got news for you, Kimmel. The last time you mattered, Bruce Jenner still had a penis.
Why didn't Jimmy Kimmel live with him? Like, Jimmy Kimmel is a talented guy, and I don't think he's like an evil person or something, but he's made this deal where he just serves power and attacks anybody who challenges power. Like, how can, honestly, how can he look in the mirror and say, "I'm doing something honorable"? Like, how can he live with himself? How can his wife sleep with him?
Well, it'd be
I mean
it'd be one thing.
Naturally, Kimmel couldn't just sit there and take it no more, so he mounted his TV pulpit and returned fire. The issue was that his monologue sounded like a depressing rehashing of his earlier jokes at Fox News. Check mocking Tucker's bow tie from 10 years ago, check ranting about misinformation, oh boy, triple check, but the zingers didn't zing. Instead, they thudded. It was like watching a band perform their best songs at half speed, and viewers noticed that the spark had vanished, the fire he used to bring had been replaced with a dull echo, and the ratings, let's say, were lower than a Maroon 5 halftime show for a guy who once dominated the late-night scene. Between a sniff and a light breeze, Kimmel's swing back landed. In this battle of laughs versus lectures, Gutfeld and Tucker are reminding everyone that perhaps people still want to laugh before they cry. Perhaps the issue isn't the jokes, but rather that the audience has already moved on by late night. The punchlines are now policy statements, and the applause breaks are just covert virtue signals. The lesson is clear: if you're going to fight in the land of sarcasm and satire, bring more than recycled outrage and weak punchlines. Compare that to Gutfeld, who hurls lines like grenades, barely pausing to watch the explosion before moving on to the next absurdity, or Tucker, whose barely arched eyebrow can land harder than a week's worth of Kimmel monologues. Bring teeth, bring wit, and bring something other than a smug smile and the same 5 political talking points you took from Reddit, because when Gutfeld unleashes the cannon of sarcasm and Tucker enters with his philosophical shiv, you better hope you've brought more than a teleprompter and a decade's worth of zingers for your next show. As the world went on, Tucker leaned back, uncrossed his legs, and grinned at the smoke rising from Kimmel's credibility. He then delivered another joke that wasn't funny, stared into the camera, and waited for applause that never came. Not because he wasn't trying, but rather because he was already finished and hadn't figured it out.